Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're continuing our series on developing collection with Amber and Legolas. Now, Legolas is a horse that's been working for about 2 years now. He's developed really well across his top line, as you can all see from these photographs and videos. See how there's no hole behind the saddle there on this horse. He's well developed and stretching beautifully into the contact now. So once again, remembering that no matter what level a horse is going to ultimately go at, or we're going to bring him up to on any given day, all horses start at the same place and end in the same place every day. That is stretched down, just in a working walk, in a stretch. Remember that when we say working trot or working walk or working canter, that means working over the back, kind of a concept that's a little bit gotten forgotten. So what's the difference between just a trot and a working trot? That is, the horse is working over its back. It's not a particular speed, as I've seen books proclaim. And I saw one book that said, oh, a working trot was between 9 and 11 miles an hour. Well, what an absurd statement, depending on the size of the horse, depending on how fast they go or how much ground they cover with each stride. So of course, with Legolas here, we can see he covers quite a bit of ground. So the stride that he might have in his working trot will be very different than some horses 15-2. So to say it's any particular mile an hour is kind of meaningless. What it really means is the horse working over its back. So once again, we start in the same position. Now today is going to be a canter day. So we're not going to do a lot of bringing him up in the walk and trot. We're mostly just going to stretch him, prepare him for his canter work. Now, with this horse, remember, we have just begun to canter him. He's such a big horse. This horse is nearly 18 hands. And he was a very big growing teenager when we got him at 4, and he's 6 now. So it's taken about 2 years to let him finish maturing and to develop over his top line correctly and begin to develop his withers up through the shoulder, which he has done beautifully, which is what allows collection to happen. That's what we have to remember about collection. It's not a trick like teaching the horse to bow or stomp his feet or whatever the case might be. It's an expression of the horse's level of physical development. Now, of course, once the horse has gone through this initial phase, which takes about 2 years of the withers pulling up through the shoulder and well developing over his back, that's what we have to see first. But that's what allows collection to happen. So the reason we see so many horses today that are hollow in dressage, and especially the upper levels, they seem to get almost hollower as they go up the levels these days. And we see that almost no one is riding in the lower levels, which is a really sad thing because the horses really need to start someplace. Not everybody can start showing at 4th level, which seems to be the case these days. So we want to bring horses up very gradually through the levels. This horse hasn't shown at all. Now he will start showing, and when he does start showing, even though will be quite advanced for the level that he's showing, but he will be consistent at those levels. I mean, really, this horse, even though he's beginning to come up into collection, I would consider him really just now a training level horse, training first level probably at this level, in the sense that, what could we go and perform tomorrow, and get a 75%? Well, that would be it, training a first level with him, as we're just developing his ability to even move in a dressage ring. So once again, as we see the horse going through these exercises, it's always the same. The exercises always come in the same order, but not in the same place every day. So today she very quickly did some leg yields. Now she's doing a little shoulder 4 in the stretch down the long side. Remember that all these lateral movements should and can be done in the stretch as well as in a higher level frame, to give the horse a chance to remember the rhythm is the most important thing. So the biggest problem that I see with so many people when they start doing lateral work is they let that lateral work really shorten the horse up, and horses end up shortened in their gaits rather than collected, and that's not at all what we want. So we're looking for the working gait to be the biggest kind of natural step that the horse can have, or the natural trot or natural canter, working over its back, but yet not extending. And that's what we're getting to see here in the walk with this horse. Now he had a little moment there. I know something spooked him a little bit and he stepped off, but you notice how she just steps right back into the work, back into the swinging stretch. So once again, today is going to be a mostly canter day, so we're not going to even ask him for collection at all. Today we're just going to bring him up into working gaits. We're mostly going to stretch him at the walk and trot, and then we're going to work on the canter a little bit. Once again, remembering that we've just started working this horse in the canter. We've probably cantered him up to now, a few dozen times in the course of 2 years' work, and that's about all, because every time you try to work the canter was just so enormous, and he had also learned to bolt in the canter. So we kind of had to get him away from all that, and now he's beginning to accept the idea of a canter, and without running away, without trying to bolt through the bridle. Once again, this is a very big horse, and he'd learned a little bit, to be a little fractious as a youngster, and we've sort of had to deal with that a little bit. So once again, we can see now she begins to bring him up more into a working walk. That is, she's asking the pole to come up, but we're looking for the walk not to change, and it really hasn't dramatically here. So he's come up and he's softening at the jaw and pole, but yet we have not shortened the walk at all, and that's what we're looking for. So once again, if by taking the reins you shorten the horse's gaits, it really has no values. That's the thing we need to remember in dressage, is that we're looking to improve the horse's natural gaits, not shorten them or make them worse by trying to make them flashy. That is, like by trying to get the knees to have a high knee action, this sort of thing that we see so many people working towards today. So once again, he's come up into a working walk, and now she'll go through the same exercises back in the shoulder in, just in the walk now, but in a more working walk, that is with the pole up as high as it can be. And once again, remembering that every horse has a different head and neck set. Not every horse is going to have this neck that comes straight upwards out of the shoulders with this giant sloping shoulder. This horse is built well. He's built pretty uphill, but he's not particularly built that way in the neck. So, we're not expecting him to have this super high head carriage. Every horse can collect, remember, but not every horse can have its head and the neck in the same position, depending on the conformation. So good rhythm here in this working walk, and notice how quickly we go through this. And once again, I'll say you'll notice that this is a whole workout on this horse. It takes about 35 minutes, and with him, that's about right. We want our workouts with the horses between about 30 and 45 minutes, an hour at the outside, just like a human. Once you pass a certain point, the muscles, it starts to deteriorate the muscles rather than build the muscles. And that seems to be at about 45-minute maximum. Same thing for people. If you're working out, after 45 minutes of weightlifting, you actually are doing yourselves harm rather than the other way around. So same thing with horses. You'll hear me say this many times. A lot of horses today are overworked. If you're spending over an hour day after day after day, grinding your horse through movements, you're probably going to have a sore horse pretty soon, because that's the point. In order to get to the upper levels, we have to keep horses sound in the lower levels, so we keep moving them upwards, so we're not having to spend a lot of time off. Remembering every time that you spend 2 weeks off, you've basically lost muscle tone, and you're having to start all over again. Once again, remember, collection is an expression of physical development. It's not a trick. So if we lose that physical development due to injury, we're always having to step back and rebuild that before we can go on. So important aspect of why it's so important to work your horses correctly in the beginning and take your time and not overwork them, so you're not constantly losing time to soundness. So this horse has been in training with us for 2 years, and basically has never had an unsound step. So that's what we want to have happen, so we can keep moving forward. Now she's just making a simple figure of 8, still in the working walk, just keeping that steady rhythm. Riding horses is very much like music. I mean, at its core, rhythm is the foundation, and a ride that has no rhythm is just like music that loses its rhythm. It's a very bad thing and disconcerting, and people will soon lose their interest in it. Well, the same is true of horses. When you see horses work in this steady rhythm, it tends to be rather captivating, and you tend to want to watch it. But when horses are very erratic, both in their frames and in their position, or seem to be irritated, at least I find it very hard to look at, especially when you realize it isn't necessary. Now, the other thing to realize also about Amber here is that she's just beginning. She's never ridden at these levels before that we're now going to. But notice that, as we go through this, she's not encountering a lot of difficulty in the horse. So, she has plenty of skills to be able to ride a horse like this. As I say very often, when you see trainers who are whipping horses up, and and people are all impressed by this, but they're never able to ride the horse like that. So they end up being sidelined by the trainers, because the trainers are making the horses so complicated, by forcing them into the aids that, for a beginner or even an intermediate rider, that can be very difficult to deal with. So once again, remember that correct training makes your horse easier to ride, not more difficult to ride. If it's becoming more difficult, then you need to rethink what you're doing. Because a Grand Prix horse should be an easier horse to ride, than a young horse. But very often today, they're made to be so oversensitive and afraid of the aids that if a beginner gets on them, they completely panic because they feel the grip in the legs. But our object is to ride completely relaxed all the time, and your legs relaxed, and not constantly pressurizing the horse, over pressurizing it. So we can see how with him he's walked very beautifully. He's come up into that working walk. She's not trying to fix his head in a position. You'll see he raises and lowers it a little bit at times depending on what we're doing. Working on half pass here a little bit. See how nicely he bends into this. And you'll notice that whenever she does have a little loss of rhythm, how she will relax the reins rather than make them tighter. So it's only taking a few minutes here, and she's almost got him through all the walk work. He's stretched, he's come up, he's done shoulder ins, he's done leg yields. Remembering that the walk is where we explain everything to the horse is why it's so important. For a big horse like this too, and once again, he was so strong, and some horses are more talented laterally than others. That is, they more easily move in lateral movements than others do. This was a very big horse, I said, very much like a long, gangly teenager. Notice once again how she does a few exercises and she comes back to the stretch again, reestablishing that forward swing. So at the moment she feels the horse shorten up a little bit, she's immediately going to go back and stretch the horse deeper into the contact and reestablish that big swing over the horse's back before we bring him up and start all over again. Remember that throughout your exercise period with your horse, your schooling for the day, we want to constantly, not constantly, but throughout the work, as we feel the horse is tiring or losing rhythm, that usually tells us that the horse is beginning to lose its back, or the back may be tiring out, and we have to come back to a stretch. Remember, it's only that when the blood flows through the muscle that we're going to bring the nutrients to those muscles, and we're going to build top line. So once again, when we see horses that are kept tight all the time, that's not happening. And you'll see how those horses their muscles will be very bunchy looking. They'll look, very overdeveloped in the hips and overdeveloped in parts of the neck, usually the underside of the neck. And we'll see a lot of tension lines in the horse's neck and body. So we don't want to see that at all. We want the horse totally relaxed. Like any other athlete, we want them to be fit and up to the task and physically developed for the task that they're being asked for, but not so much that it's in tension, because that will stop everything eventually. Good working walk there in that half pass, so that was really nice, coming to the center line. Good bend. Now she's doing a counter change of hand this time, so we're beginning to move him backwards and forwards in the half pass. So really good there. And once again, whatever we're working in the walk in terms of the lateral movement, we're probably not working quite that much, and this horse has just started doing half passes at the trot. And, but ultimately we want the horse to be able to do everything in all three gaits, including the stretch. So once again, today is going to be a work day where we're mostly working on the canter. So we're just letting him have a good warm up here at the walk, and we're going to do a little bit of trot work, and then we'll get into the canter work. So we work very differently, At this level, we can't expect to go through everything every day. So we pick things that we're going to work on different days. Remember, this is only the second day of his week, so we're still pretty much stretching him. Just like any other athlete, a runner doesn't go run a marathon every day. If they did, they'd be crippled. The same thing is true of the horse. We can't ride the horse to its highest level every day without the horse tiring out. And so learning to read the horse as well. Some days, we find many days in a row where all of a sudden, as the horse develops strength, he's able to continue and going up the levels and doing and holding the positions for a little bit longer. So that's what we're looking for. A little improvement every day is the key to all of this. So she starts into a nice swinging trot here after doing the walk work. The walk work was all good, very rhythmic. She went through all the lateral movements. And now she's starting out in the trot, in the stretch. Now, once again, I see a lot of people who kind of have the idea to stretch and relieve their horses, but they only do it at the end of the lesson. Remember that in order to get the horse working correctly, we want these stretches to become very, very, very early on. As I say, we want to go right to a trot and be able to stretch the horse. If we can't, we probably need more development before we get to this stage, because we want the horse to be relaxed all the way through. We don't want a tense lesson, then try to appease the horse by stretching it at the very end. Now, once again, that's better than not stretching at all, but your progress will be much greater if you keep the stretches coming in all the gaits throughout the work. Whenever we feel the horse tense or beginning to tire, instead of trying, in other words, instead of trying to fight through a difficult movement, in other words, come back to a trot, let the horse regain its musculature again, and then try again. So again, a good slow, and if you go back and watch. For my own edification yesterday, I went back and looked at some earlier tapes on him just to remind myself of how different the horse is now moving. If you go back and look at the earlier films of this horse, you'll see he's moving quite a bit faster. He's not moving nearly as deep. He's not stretching as deep here and here, and the movement is not so off the ground. Now we can see he's developed to the point where the forehand is beginning to really lift up all on its own, even in the stretch here. Once again, remember the head and neck position has very little to do with whether a horse is on the forehand or not. A horse that's hollow is always on the forehand, no matter how high its head and neck is, as we see like in a saddlebred horse, an extreme case, and where the shoes are all jacked up. So they've done everything to artificially make the horse look like it's uphill, that is putting on these jacked up shoes and that sort of thing, which of course doesn't result in anything but a lame horse. So good change of directions here, and once again, look how rhythmic it is and how the horse continues to flow forward in the workout. And that's what we want to have happen. It's like good music. It has to have rhythm. The rhythm is what guides everything. If the horse loses the rhythm and it usually is telling you that it's in the process about to lose its back or has already lost its back. And we don't want anything to be abrupt, just like we don't want our corners, as you've heard me talk about before. We don't want to pull or drive our horses straight into the corners, as so many teachers recommend these days. And then all you can do is pull the horse around with your inside rein. So we'll watch, and as this horse comes to this corner, we can see how he just bends nicely through it, staying in the stretch. He doesn't drive him straight into it, but look how nice he's able to go through that corner. He's able to bend in the body. And once again, remembering that when we talk about lateral bend of the horse, it's dependent on longitudinal bend, that is bend over the top line, that is the horse lifting up the top line. No horse can ever be supple until its back is lifted. We see a lot of people who don't understand this doing things like twisting the necks back and forth, and things like this, thinking that they're suppling the horse. Well, that does absolutely nothing to the horse except make him rubberize in the neck. You notice how we always keep the neck in line with the spine, because if you take the neck out of line with the rest of the spine, it would be like trying to play a piano with your hands like crimped over. You wouldn't be able to use your entire musculature. That is, it should come from your back, for instance, playing a piano. Same thing is true of the horse. If we're in the right position, and you see Amber is here stretching up, she's able to keep a nice, quiet, consistent contact with the horse's mouth. And once again, remember that Amber is only beginning to ride at this level herself. So everything you see is going through here, we're basically teaching her and the horse at the same time. But because we're asking for things that are always in order and in perspective to what the horse is capable of doing, we don't encounter a lot of resistance. And even if we did, all we would do is go back and stretch the horse again and ask for the exercise again. So once again, all we've done so far here is just warm the horse up. The whole day today has been about just warming him up for the canter work, getting him working well over his back and stretching, getting a good length of stride. But I don't want to tire him out by doing a lot of trot work, a lot of sitting trot work, and the hardest exercises that he does, like extensions and things like this, before we go to the canter work. I want to save the energy, because I know at this level, when I'm pushing the envelope a little bit on any particular thing a horse does, that I have to reserve. The horse only has so much strength and so much energy, so to speak, that it can use on any given day, just like you and I. Sometimes you go to the gym and you feel really strong and you can jump right to heavy weights. Other times you can't. Or you shouldn't, anyway. If you do, you'll get injured, which is why we see the same thing with people. I'm 62 years old and I've tried to keep myself fit all my life, and by virtue of it, I'm a pretty happy, healthy guy at my age. Same thing will be true of your horses. Once again, just beautiful big swing in this. And just watch how this has just flowed from movement to movement as we've warmed him up. I see way too many people stopping their horses a lot. Once again, there's no rhythm in the work that they do. So once again, she's going through the exercises in the same order of the walk here. She's starting out with the leg yield once she got him stretching. And remember, the leg yield is the first exercise that we have to teach a horse, even so before a circle, because the horse cannot circle correctly. It's never going to bend on a circle until it's already leg yielding, because every circle should be created by leg yielding the horse out away from your inside leg into the outside rein. Really good stretch here in the trot. Exactly what we're looking for. She's doing a little shoulder 4 here. She develops as he goes, and that's really good. And notice how there was no change of the stride and no change of the rhythm. That's what we're always looking for. Maintenance of the rhythm and maintenance of the frame. That is the horse working over its back, as opposed to a false frame that horses can be pulled into with things like draw reins and these kind of harsh methods. Now you'll notice this horse does have a double bridle, but notice how she's riding the horse off the snaffle all the time, that the curb rarely has any tension on it. Now with him, we're beginning to school him in the double bridle because we are working the canter so much, and because of his earlier training and the fact that he had learned to bolt in the canter, and also he had also learned to throw his head up every time you canter. So the double bridle just gives us that little bit more control when we need it for a little bit more finesse to school those tendencies out of him. Gives us that little bit of extra that we need. And once again, remembering that if you use a double bridle, there isn't any time there should ever be a constant backwards tension on the curb rein. If there is, you'll only be putting the horse's mouth to sleep ultimately, and that's not what we want to do. So same thing here, just on the other rein. She's now stretching him in the trot here. Once again, this is all just in preparation for the canter work that we're going to do. Good shoulder 4 here, still in the stretch. I love how he even starts to stretch down more. Once again, see how easily he flows through those corners in balance. Remembering once again that your corners should only be a quarter of the smallest circle that you can perform. So if your horse can only perform a 20-meter circle, the end of your arena is kind of just going to be a big rounded turn, as that's about all your horse is going to be able to do. As the horse develops and is able to do smaller circles, your corners will at the same time become smaller. So that's what we're looking for. Always what works in rhythm. So here she goes after warming up the horse's back. Now she's able to sit to the trot, and notice how there was no change in the horse's rhythm. He's still coming forward into that light contact, a light positive contact. Now remembering once again, this was also a horse that had been broken severely at the third vertebrae, and so it took us quite a while. It takes about a year to heal that of just stretching. So if you have a horse that's been broken in the third vertebrae or fourth vertebrae, when we say broken, remember what we're really talking about is the ligaments and tendons that hold the spine together have been pulled apart at that point in the neck by being forced against the hand or forced into draw reins, are notorious for doing this. And so what we have to do is just stay in the stretch until we heal that, because that is like a break in your wiring. It's a break in your communication with the horse. When the horse is correct, she just does a little bit of lengthening here. Look how beautifully he swings through. But once again, we're keeping it very easy here, just in a rising trot. We're still just getting ready to do our canter work is all that we're getting ready for. Everything we've done here today, we're not asking for collection. He's in a good working trot here, but we're not asking for any degree of collection. But once again, understanding that collection evolves out of all these things. It's not something, you can't force a horse into collection. You can force a horse to be very tense and to shorten its gait. And once again, if you have one of these $1 million movers, then it still looks a bit like something to people who don't know what they're looking at. Once again, see how beautifully he flowed through that corner, and now he's up in the shoulder in here in a working gait, and how nice and rhythmic that is. There was really no change between her rising and sitting trot. That's exactly what we're looking for. But once again, on this day, we're not looking for collection. We're just looking to have a work in the canter. So everything we're doing is just aimed at that. Working the serpentine here. Very good trot, powering up underneath the body. And once again, as I said, if you go back and look at some earlier videos of him, even when we brought him up in the working trot, there was much less lift in his forehand. In other words, it's become much, much lighter now. He's beginning to carry himself in self-carriage, which is ultimately the goal. And once again, to understand that self-carriage can never be obtained by pulling a horse and holding against her hand. How would a horse ever become light? So many people who think their horse is light are really just horses that have been broken in the third or fourth vertebrae, and they're really behind the bridle, and they don't really take a correct contact. But you can see once they get over their backs like this, how they just continue to flow forward. There was a question that came into me last week about how you should ride, a turn, what you should do with your hands, and should you have more pressure inside, outside. The reality is when a turn is made correctly and the horse is correctly trained, all we do is put our body in the position of the turn, our outside leg back and outside shoulder come around a little bit, and the horse just conforms itself underneath us to that position that we're putting ourselves in, and the horse turns. Simple as that. So again, going back to the sitting trot here. Just a good active working trot, working over his back as we prepare for the canter work. So that was really quite nice. Now you could see how just for a moment there he thought about trying to throw his head, which is what he used to do all the time. He'd throw his head right up in the air. So that was really quite good. He went into the canter, he lifted up his forehand, and you can see now he's in quite a good working canter. As I said, a few months earlier only, this horse, it was impossible to even canter him on a 20-meter circle. He's just such a big horse and had such a giant stride. But now he's able to do a 20-meter circle quite nicely, steady over his back, and this is what we're working on today. So you'll start seeing us do a lot more canter now that he can canter. So again, you'll never improve a bad canter by doing more canter. That'll only make the horse sore in the back. So now we go through the same exercises that we do in the walk and trot. So now we're doing a leg yield in the canter. All the exercises always come in each gait in the same order. So that was really good, no change of rhythm. He kept himself up in that. So for him, this is very, very good. He's settling into the canter quite nicely, staying uphill. And you can see that he has a few moments where she has to correct him, but he's never pulling against the reins. So now she's going to do a little bit of half pass in the canter, like that. We're starting to get that a little bit, and just to the center line. That was really good. And once again, tracking to the left. Little circle here, she lets him just out a little bit in the neck. Just to reestablish that canter, moving forward. Exactly what we want. Now you'll notice in this exercise that the actual canter work, everything that we had warmed the horse up for, is actually only going to take us about 5 or 10 minutes to go through. Because everything was just building him up, getting him ready for that. Now she's going to do a serpentine of 3 loops without changing the lead. This is the next exercise we do. And he does that very nicely. And once again, for a horse of his size to be able to make those turns in here and counter canter and not change the rhythm is absolutely excellent. Just what we're looking for. So that was all that work. So that was really good. Comes back to a beautiful working trot sitting. Comes back underneath himself quite nicely for him. She has to do a little rebalancing there, but nothing severe because he stayed pretty much over his back in the downward transition. And now we come back to the trot stretch. So after we do that difficult work, so that was really good. And we also added that last little bit because that he's getting ready. We're thinking about showing now with this horse. So we're beginning to think about those kind of things of what comes next. So he was able to make that downward transition quite nicely from the canter and go large and then come back to this. That's exactly what we're looking for. So we begin to string the exercises a little bit together. So what that exercise was all about is being able to do the canter, come back to a working trot sitting after the canter, maintain it, and be able to continue going large before we come back to the stretch. So in other words, we asked him to do those 2 things in a row to make that transition from the canter to the trot and then maintain it. So remember, we are only just beginning to do this. We literally have cantered this horse only a couple of dozen times in the course of all his training up to now because it just was too difficult for him. So all of a sudden, once we build the muscle in correctly, all of a sudden all these things become no problem at all, and that's what we're looking for. So when it's right, you know it, as the saying goes, because it isn't difficult. It isn't a struggle. So if you're asking your horse to do things and everything seems to be a struggle or a fight or a battle, or you're watching your trainer work your horse and everything seems to be a fight, struggle, and constantly whipping the horse up and that sort of thing, that's completely unnecessary and counterproductive to anything that's really dressage. So she comes back to the sitting trot here to get ready for the next canter. And he does that really very nicely. See how he just lifted up a little bit? And she didn't try to force his head to stay down. It wanted to lift just a little bit, but that was not bad at all. For him, that was really quite good. So once again, so we just move right on. That was good enough. So now we start through the same exercises. It's always the same sequence in one direction as the next. So here she goes back to the leg yield. And it's always a little different from one side to the other. Very nicely done there. As she straightens him down the long side. Now she's going to do a little half pass in the canter. Just like that, and then straight down the center line. So that was beautifully done. He's done this only once or twice before. So we're happy with that. That was really very good. So once again, you see how when you build a good foundation in the walk, how easy it is as you go up the levels to use those same exercises and how easily they come. If a horse is can't do a half pass in the walk, I guarantee you when you try it in the trot and canter, it's going to be a lot more difficult. So that was really good. Now he comes to his 3-loop serpentine in the canter. Once again, you can see how he struggles and has to work a little hard there to come around that corner without losing it, but he does really good. And once again, for a horse of this size, once again, this horse is just under 18 hands. He's very, very big with a huge stride. Makes a pretty good downward transition. He propped a little bit on his forehand there, but quickly got himself back under himself. So for a young horse doing this, I certainly wouldn't make any problem with him with that. And now she's going to come back to the stretch. So that's what the whole exercise today was about. It was about teaching the horse getting into the canter and seeing what we have in the canter and working through these same exercises, maintaining them, and then we come back to the trot work. So his whole exercise, everything up to that point, which was canter, was just preparing for the canter. And look how easily he was able to canter. We were able to do the things that we asked him to do. There wasn't any big struggle because he was prepared to do them. Once again, this is only a couple of dozen times that we've even cantered this horse in a couple of years' time. So again, you see how when they're ready, you come up and all of a sudden you can do it. And all of a sudden you can see, obviously, we come down. Now, with the horse at this level, as he's getting ready to show, we like to end with a transition down the center line and a good halt. And you'll notice that we only do this once. And when you remember the correct halt, once you're sitting to the trot, you stretch up, not slam your back into the horse. And when we do that, see how easily he steps up into the halt. This has been Will Faerber and Amber. See you next time.